And the third benefit that I believe it provides is it just provides that central hub for your guests as they're coming into town. Often, if you have a hotel room block, you can deliver welcome gifts to that hotel. You can do shuttle pickups at that hotel. Again, these are things that you and or your planner want to talk to the hotel about. But typically, if you have a contracted block at a hotel, you're guaranteeing them that revenue. And they, in return, are letting you use it as sort of a hub of your wedding weekend for pickups, for welcome gifts, the reduced rate for your guests, and making sure your guests have those rooms.
Live your life within the moment, and don't go wait until the morning.
Welcome to The Wedding Plan. My name is Tyler Spire, and me and my team produce bespoke events across the globe. This podcast is where I share key advice for planning your own wedding, as well as behind-the-scenes adventures and stories from the events we produce. Hey friends, welcome to The Wedding Plan. I am so glad you are here. And today we are going to be jumping into all things hotel room blocks. So this is especially relevant to you if you are planning a destination wedding, or if after you've made your guest list, you're seeing that a lot of your guests are going to be traveling to where you're getting married, even if it's not a destination for you, but you have a lot of people that are going to need accommodations and be traveling. You want to make sure you at least consider getting a room block. So you've already chosen your venue. You've already worked on your guest list. You've already hired your planner. You've already talked to the parties to be about the budget. Kind of in the previous episodes, we've discussed those very initial steps. And then one of the first steps that I like to talk to my couples about, obviously there's a lot of things that get done in the beginning, right? A lot of exciting decisions. But one that we want to make sure we address from the very beginning is guest travel. So a hotel room block is essentially a contract that you enter into with a hotel. And what the hotel does for you is, one, they'll often offer a reduced rate for your guests to book a room. Now, this is not always the case. Some really high demand markets, we find that the room block comes back and it's not a significantly reduced rate. But often there is some sort of reduction to the market rate for your guests. Number two, the hotel will hold those rooms out of their general inventory and essentially reserve them for you and your guests to book. So especially if it's a really popular location and things book up really fast, it ensures that those rooms are available to you and or your guests. And then the third benefit that I believe it provides is it just provides that central hub for your guests as they're coming into town. Often, if you have a hotel room block, you can deliver welcome gifts to that hotel. Sometimes there's a fee for that. That's something that's good to ask about when you're entering into a room block if you're thinking you're going to do welcome amenities. Often, if you have a big room block at a hotel, you can do shuttle pickups at that hotel. Again, these are things that you and or your planner want to talk to the hotel about. Communication is key. We never want to spring anything on anybody or make assumptions. But typically, if you have a contracted block at a hotel, you're guaranteeing them that revenue, and they in return are letting you use it as sort of a hub of your wedding weekend for pickups, for welcome gifts, the reduced rate for your guests, and making sure your guests have those rooms. So if a hotel gives you a bid or a estimate for a room block and you notice that it's not a significant reduction from the market rate, that's a good question to ask the hotel is, hey, I noticed that this is really similar to market rate. Is there any further reduction that's possible? And if not, something to keep in mind is often we're getting our room block contracts, maybe a year out from the date. And if you've ever, booked a hotel before, when you're searching for room rates and things, often the prices are less a full year out than when you get a lot closer to the date of your travel. Most hotels price their rooms based on availability, and they have their systems and algorithms, and I'm not an expert in how hotels price their rooms. But in general, as the hotel gets more full, rooms get more expensive. So another benefit to locking in a room block at a full year out is you're locking in that rate for your guests. To use a nice rounded number, say the hotel offers you a $500 a night room rate. And say that same room is listed on their website at $650 a night. That's a benefit to your guests. And then as time goes on with the hotel, and people are booking rooms and things, whatever's listed on the website is most likely going to go up. So that room that was $650 when you signed the room block contract, maybe it's $750 when you're 3 months out from the event. Maybe it's at $950 when you're the week before. But for your guests within the room block, that $500 a night is kept all the way through. I do have advice for my couples as we move forward with getting room blocks. So a few tips and tricks here. Number one, it's so important to fully understand the contract before you sign. Most room blocks require that you book a certain percentage of the rooms. They're providing you, the hotel is providing you with these benefits of the reduced rate and the other things that we've discussed, and you in return are guaranteeing them this revenue. Most room blocks have an attrition rate of 80% or 90%. And again, every market's different, so you need to read the contract for your room block. And what that means is if it's a 90% attrition, that if you have 10 rooms in your block, you are guaranteeing that you will book 9 of them. If you have 20 rooms in your block, you're guaranteeing that you will book 18 of them. You are guaranteeing the revenue for 90% of those rooms. So it is so important that you, from the very beginning, think really intentionally about who of my guests will actually stay in this block. Now, we can't perfectly predict all of our guests' behavior, but in general, if it's a list of your closest family and friends, you can kind of get a sense of, okay, these are the people that are traveling in. And, say it's 50% of your guest count are traveling and you have 100 guests. That's like 50 guests that are traveling, and most people travel in couples. You can kind of generalize that, or you can look at your guest list to be like, okay, that's a family. Okay, so maybe you need 15 rooms, 20 rooms. I don't know. Every guest list is going to look a little bit different. But it's really important to not overcommit in your room block because you are contractually responsible to fill that percentage of rooms as specified in the contract. With that in mind, I never want my couples to overcommit, not just to the number of rooms, but also to too many hotels. In general, we recommend a room block at one hotel. And if we need it, maybe a secondary hotel. The reasons to get a second hotel is often due to price. We want to be hospitable and welcoming to all of our guests, and we want to make sure that we're being respectful of different people's comfort level with spending. And so if you are getting married, for example, at a 5-star hotel, or you're doing your room block at a 5-star hotel and getting married at a venue nearby, and you're getting a room block there, and the rooms are at a premium price, you may consider getting a room block at a nearby hotel for something that's more of a mid-tier price, something that's a little bit more affordable. Maybe it's for your friends from college, your cousins. I don't know who's on the guest list that might be on a little bit more of a budget, but that is being hospitable and being welcoming and saying, hey, we have a couple options for you. Just remember, the more room block contracts you sign, the more revenue you are guaranteeing to those hotels. And if your guests do not book those rooms, you will be on the hook for them. In addition to the price point for your guests, it's really important to consider the location of the hotels as well. If you are getting married at a hotel itself, often you are getting a room block at that hotel. And sometimes it is done as a part of the initial booking process, and it's all one contract for your event and for the room block. And sometimes it is done as 2 separate contracts. Every hotel brand does things a little bit differently. And obviously, if you're getting married at that hotel, you're in close proximity. So if you're going to get a secondary room block, maybe something that's a little more affordable or something nearby, we want to make sure it's in really close proximity to the hotel. You don't want to put people up over on the other side of town. Essentially what you're doing when you're saying you have this room block, this secondary option, is you're saying, hey, I've researched the area. This is close by. It's a little bit less expensive, and it's a great option for you. So proximity is really important. If you are getting married at a private estate or somewhere where the guests are all being shuttled there and need to drive there, you're not staying on site, I think that proximity to venue is so important. There's nothing that ends the night on a damper, in my opinion, than a super long car ride or shuttle ride, especially after a day of celebrating and having fun and drinking and dancing and all the things. Often the road there is not so bad. It's the road back. And we want to make sure we end the night on a high note. So if you're getting married at a more remote location or somewhere that's a little further from hotels, and that's the only option, I think that's something to consider before you book the venue. And if you're still in love with it and still want to do it, I think it's important to communicate clearly with your guests that it is a little bit of a shuttle ride. And then finding accommodations that are as close as possible so that everybody is comfortable. And it's also for convenience sake for yourself, for getting married, moving people from point A to point B, and all the various things. Being nice and close is so important. So we've talked about proximity, we've talked about rates, we've talked about not overbooking. In general, I tell my clients to decide kind of on the right number of rooms, be a little bit more on the conservative side, right? It's never an issue to go add more rooms later. Now, that being said, they may be at a different rate. You're subject to a new contract. There's kind of other things. But in general, you can expand a contract later. Again, potentially with new rates and things. You're not locking in that same rate for all the rooms. So you want to be careful there. But it's a lot harder, if not impossible, to shrink a room block commitment. And so in general, though, I say look at your guest list and say, just to use nice round numbers, you have 100 people. And 60 of them are coming in from out of town. So we can pretty safely assume that out of those, most people travel as couples. There's a few singles, maybe a few families, whatever, but we can round down and say, so that's about 30 rooms that are needed. Then my next set of math is I kind of look at, if you know your guests really well, your parents know the guests well, whoever it is, you can kind of look and be like, okay, these are the people who kind of historically stay at the nicer properties. And again, this is not done from a place of being judgmental or deciding who can afford what. That's not what the intention is here. The intention is to be a good host and make sure you're providing options. And so without getting weird, and without like making it awkward, just quickly looking and being like, oh, like aunt and uncle so-and-so, okay, they like typically like to stay somewhere a little nicer. I'm pretty sure they'd want to stay at this hotel. Oh, okay, I think, they just finished college. They're probably a little bit more on a budget. Oh, but grandma might cover their room. Just like a quick, friendly, easy look through of the guests to say who might stay in the nicer room block and who would maybe stay somewhere a little bit less expensive. If you can get that data, that can help influence what you're going to do with the block. So maybe you look at that and you're like, okay, about 15 people we're dang certain that they would stay at the nicer hotel, and the rest we aren't quite sure. So then maybe the right thing to do is get a room block for 15 rooms and get out your save the dates and see, who books it. And then if you need to ask the hotel to add more rooms, again, maybe at a different rate, but then you can do that. And again, it's a nice kind of conservative block. If your list of people who might want to stay somewhere a little more budget friendly is large, 10 rooms or more, most hotels have a 10-room minimum and often a 2-night minimum as well, which is perfect for a wedding. Usually do the night before, the night of, or, again, every hotel's different, every market's different. So it's just important to read those contracts and ask those questions. But if you have a pretty big group of people that would want to stay somewhere maybe a little bit less expensive, then maybe it is worth getting that secondary block. We can also always assume that you're going to have some guests that even if you provide a suggestion, they're going to stay where they want to stay. I know like a lot of guests love their Hilton Honors points or their Marriott points, or maybe they have a friend or family member, or maybe they just love staying in Airbnbs and they're all going to crash together. So you can't assume that everyone will book a room block. So you can always, I usually allocate for about 20% of those guests that are traveling, kind of making their own plans. To me, that's a nice conservative estimate and it usually works. If you look at your guest list and you're like, I have no idea who would stay where, if these are your closest people, just ask. We've had couples text their friends, be like, hey, we're looking at getting a room block at this hotel. The rate is $600 a night. And the hotel's going to have us commit to the number of rooms we book. Would you be interested in staying at this hotel, or would you want to look somewhere else? If these are your closest people, again, like dad's random cousin on the other side that you barely know, probably awkward to send that information. But for your closest, nearest, dearest, key people coming, just ask, just communicate. We can look into a secondary block somewhere else. We want to be respectful of everyone's budgets, and we're just trying to get a sense of who is comfortable staying at the hotel with us. Your parents could ask their closest friends. Again, you can usually do this without having to ask, but if you're looking and you're like, I just don't know, then ask, because we don't want you to get in a situation where then you've overcommitted. So what happens if you book your room block and not enough guests have booked? First thing I say is go read the contract. There's often different deadlines in the contract. Like if you do, don't book by a certain date, there's this penalty. If you do this, there's this penalty. And you can kind of go through and look at that. But what we typically recommend is if you're under, so say your room block's for 20 rooms, you need to book 18 and your guests have booked 14. There's 4 extra rooms. You can request a list from the hotel of who's staying in the block and see that and make sure no one's missing. And if someone is missing, be like, hey, friendly reminder, we have a room block at this hotel. Would you like to stay there? And make sure you get it filled. Or you can offer to host those rooms. But I tell my couples, never just leave the rooms on the table, because you're guaranteeing that revenue. So if you book 14 and you need to have 18 and you just don't book the extra 4 rooms, those 4 rooms, you're just going to pay that revenue to the hotel and it's going to kind of go away. So if anything, what I tell couples is on that last day of the deadline, if you are short, just make a reservation, because you're going to have to spend the money anyways, and then figure out what you want to do with those rooms. A couple creative solutions, or maybe it's, you want an extra room just for your stuff. Maybe there are a few family members that are a little bit more on a budget and you or your families would like to host those rooms for them. Or I've also had couples do a hybrid where, they say, hey, to a family member, we have an extra room in our block. We're going to cover it. I know your original rate at this other hotel was $200 a night. If you just pay $200 a night, we'll cover the difference. Then you get to enjoy this room and we're not out a room. You can be creative with how you do it, but definitely make sure you book those rooms. Finally, as you are negotiating room blocks, figuring out what you want to do, I think working with a seasoned planner is so important. If you're not working with a seasoned planner, then working really closely with the hotel and understanding what you are committing to is so important. How many rooms are you guaranteeing? How are your guests going to book those rooms? Are they calling? Are they getting a link? I also like to ask about shoulder dates, right? If your room block is for Friday night and Saturday night and your wedding's on the Saturday, what happens if a guest wants to come in on Thursday or leave on Sunday? Does the room apply to those days, or do you have to add them to the contract? If you need to add them to the contract, what's a reasonable number to add? If, depending on how far the travel is, people are traveling really, really far, it may make sense to have more nights because more people will travel for more days. If it's a shorter trip, it may make sense to have less. So I think really taking a look at it and understanding what you were signing, understanding what you were committing to, understanding what options there are for your guests, I think are really, really important. We have some couples that go through the whole process and they look at it and they're like, you know what? We're going to skip a room block. We're not going to do a formal contracted room block because we don't want the contractual risk. And guys, that's okay. You can decide that that's not the right fit for you. Some other creative solutions are some hotels will offer a discount code. They will give you a code that your guests can get at checkout. This usually isn't at the higher end hotels, usually more of like a mid-level or lower level, but again, just depends on the market, where your guests can go in and get a discount code when they book the room. This basically is like a coupon where you're not committing to do anything and the hotel's not committing to save you anything. It's just like whatever the room is, your guests will get 5%, 10% off, whatever it is. And some hotels won't do that, and that's okay too. Another creative solution is you can just book, if you are getting married at a luxury venue or you want to stay somewhere really luxurious and you only have like 6, people that would stay there. So it doesn't make sense to do the room block. Book those 6 rooms, make that reservation, work with the hotel. And then if you don't feel comfortable committing to rooms anywhere else, then just give your guests some suggestions of nearby hotels. And you can even say in your website or your communication, well, we don't have a formal block of rooms. These are 3 nearby hotels that we recommend checking out. Or don't even address that you don't have a room block. Just be like, here's some local hotels that we suggest looking at for accommodations. Nice, simple, easy. At the end of the day, if you have a large number of guests that are traveling to the area, we do recommend getting room block because I think that the benefits outweigh the risks if you have enough people traveling and if you do your due diligence. I love that the rooms are held at that great rate. A lot of people book early. I book my travel early, but then you're going to have those guests that just are like spacey and don't book until like a couple months out. And you're going to have locked in that rate from way back a year ago, which is such a service to them. Also, I find it really helpful with the room block. The hotel's giving you data. They give you reports of who's booked in the block. If you just do a code or you just have people kind of booking wherever, you're not getting that data. And when the hotel gives you that data, then you're able to be like, okay, these 30 families are staying at this hotel. I want to give them each a little welcome gift or a welcome card and talk to the hotel about maybe something nice we could do for them, things like that. So I think that that's really important. And then also as a planner, especially if I have to be shuttling guests from point A to point B, it's pretty rare that you can just send a shuttle to do a random pickup at a hotel if you don't have a contract at that hotel. Maybe it works in some markets, definitely doesn't work in my market. And so having that room block opens the communication from between me, the planner, and the hotel to be able to say, hey, we need some shuttles to pick up these guests. Where's the best place to do that? The timing, just making sure that we're all in sync so that everything goes so smoothly.
Live your life within the moment. And don't go wait until the morning. You never know when it is over. All that I know is we'll get older. So let us dance this night away.